Hello, this is Randy Rice, and my presentation is Surviving as a Tester Even in Difficult Circumstances. First of all, I want to start out a little bit about why I chose this topic, and really being keyed into the human factors of testing for a long time. This has always been something that has been near and dear to my heart, is not only to teach people how to test better, but also to help them make their lives and their careers better. Kind of an interesting thing happened at STAR East last year. I was keynoting, and I wanted to kind of have a light opener kind of thing at the beginning. And so at a previous STAR conference, at one of the lightning talks, I had given this little presentation about 10 surefire ways to demotivate your team. And it went over pretty well as a humorous thing. So I thought, okay, maybe we can start out with a little humor and then go on from there. Well, as it turned out, what was funny in one conference wasn't very funny in another conference, but even more than that, after my session, most of the people that talked to me about the session were talking about the first 3 slides that I showed about how to demotivate your team. And they were all complaining that that was the situation that they were in. So with that said, I'm going to show you the 3 slides, okay? And of course, this is meant to be from a sarcastical, backwards perspective. But anyway, number 10 is to set unreasonable stretch goals just to see how hard people will work. Number 9 is never explain your rationale for decisions. 8 is to assign meaningless tasks. 7, no matter how good something is, criticize it. And then number 6, be sure and take all the credit for yourself if you're the manager. And number 5, solve problems by building a new bureaucracy. Number 4, listen like a brick wall. Number 3, refuse to consider ways to do the job more effectively. Number 2, treat your team like they're machines and that they should never break down. And finally, the number 1 way to demotivate your team is never, ever, in any circumstance, give anyone praise or recognition. So it really kind of struck a chord with people. And I think was, like I said, a little bit sobering for some folks to say, hey, that's my job. That's where I work. Well, what's in this for you? And I want to make sure that I'm clear at the outset of what you can expect in this session. First of all, I want to go through some strategies for knowing how to deal with difficult managers and or coworkers and lower your personal stress level by a result of doing that. But also to have a positive direction for your career and to get a little bit of wisdom about organizational dysfunction, what it is, why it happens, that kind of thing. And also some proactive ways that you can thrive regardless of your circumstances. Basically, I'm here to give you some hope because I know sometimes testing can get to be not only a bit of a drag, but very much of one. And sometimes the situations are just really bad. Sometimes they're great. And so I hope you're one of the minority, actually, that works for one of those great companies that values their testers, that gives them recognition and all of that. But I am afraid you're in the minority from the people that I talk with. But anyway, there is hope. Now, the reason I know there's hope is because of my story. In my career, I've been totally burned out at least 3 times over the last 25 years, maybe more times than that, but those are the 3 biggies that I can count, and I have gone through 2 major bouts of depression, and it was all over work-related kind of things. And I've also worked and consulted in several organizations that were very dysfunctional. I mean, it was like one of those situations where I felt like I was being waterboarded every day that I was there. And the weeks drug on to months, and finally I got to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore. And but I did, however, find a way above a lot of all of this stuff. And that's what I want to share with you. Now, I do have to give a disclaimer at the outset here that, of course, everyone's situation is different. As I said earlier, you may work for a great company, but you may work for a very dysfunctional one as well, and there can be so many different variations of dysfunction. And I also realize that some of you are deeply invested in your company and your organization. You may have like 3 years to go to retirement or something, and you don't want to lose that, and I totally understand that. So I'm not saying go out immediately and quit your job by any means. So just take my advice for what it is. It's free, and it's just my experience and some things that I tell other testers and test managers. So definitely before making any drastic changes, get other counsel. If you're married, talk to your spouse. If you have a mentor, talk with them. But at least try to get some objectivity around this. Well, I'm going to start out first with the bad news. And the bad news is that most organizations do have a certain level of dysfunction. That's why Dilbert was such a popular cartoon, because we could see ourselves in those Dilbert strips. And the other piece of bad news is that you really don't have much control over what your management does above you. So that can kind of leave you with a helpless feeling at times. And in fact, you don't have little control over what your coworkers do or don't do. They may be just as much of the problem in this whole topic as anyone else. But I do have some good news for you, because first of all, you're in a great profession, that of software testing. And you can make positive changes in your own life and career that can be an investment no matter where you work. You can take those with you wherever you go. And there's also the hope that circumstances do change eventually. And as I say on the slide here, it might be slow, but they do eventually change. Now, this presentation is about you. Now, you may be a manager, you may be a tester or test lead or test analyst. I don't know what your role is, but there are some things that you can do as an individual in the testing profession. But the problem is that you're impacted and somewhat constrained by the people around you. But on the positive side of that too, you can impact those around you as well. You can be an influence on those folks. Now, some of the solutions I'm going to suggest will apply to things you can do, while others may apply to things that your team can do. Some of this you can't do on your own, or you shouldn't try to do on your own. So, some of you know me from writing a book many years ago called Surviving the Top 10 Challenges of Software Testing. Well, over the years, it's amazing, those 10 challenges pretty much have stayed the same because they're mainly people problems. But here's the big 5, just really pain points that I hear most often. Sometimes people will say, I have a clueless manager. Or they may say something like, our upper management is clueless about testing or projects or whatever. Your manager may be great, but it's their management that may be totally clueless. Another thing that I hear is that testers aren't valued where I work. Another thing is we don't get the resources such as tools, time, and people and all that to do the kind of testing that we need to do. And a fourth one is our findings are ignored or overridden by someone else. And finally, testers are blamed for any failures seen in production. So you've probably heard these as well. And they're not instantly solved, but I do want to go through some of these. I'll go through all of them actually, and give you some of my thoughts on them and how maybe you can deal with them. Now, in the clueless manager, this one is a little tough because this person controls a lot about your work life. Okay, now there are those that think they know how to lead and manage, but they really don't know how to lead, and that's kind of dangerous. It's called the unknown incompetence level of doing something. You're bad at it, but you don't know it yet. And the thing about that level is that you don't even know that you need to improve. And then there are those that need help. They know they need help, but they just don't have the support and mentoring needed to actually get better in testing, or to know about testing, or to know about leadership, to know where they need to be making changes. And then there are some managers and leaders that are just mean. It shouldn't be that way, but there are some real cases out there. But as I said, unfortunately, you cannot many times just directly confront these people, because they do control your raises, your promotions, and other things in your career. But here's some ideas. One of the things you can do is just to try to be a positive influence on them. You can share some ideas with them. Now be careful, or be aware at least, that they may steal those ideas and claim them for their own, and everyone applauds them and you're sitting there at the table wondering what happened. Well, they didn't have their own ideas, so they stole yours. But also, one of the big things you can do is try to be as supportive as you can of them and gain their confidence. The clueless manager, I believe, typically lacks confidence in what they're doing. And so if you ask too many questions, raise too many objections, that kind of makes them react in typically a harsh way sometimes, a defensive way. And so I'm not saying you have to go along with everything that they do necessarily, but they are your manager and they are your leader, and you have to figure out a way to be supportive, gain their confidence, and be this good influence to maybe steer them in a better direction than what they're wanting to go. One of the things I used to tell my managers when I was both a programmer and early on in my testing career is, I want to help you be successful. Directly tell them that. Let them know that. Let them know that you want to make them look good. It's a really powerful thing for them to hear from you. Now, they may or may not believe you, but I mean it sincerely. You do want to make them look good. Another thing you can do is find out if they have a mentor. Now, my belief is every tester and every test manager should have a mentor. If they do, that's great, because perhaps you can discreetly mention some of the specific issues going on to their mentor, and kind of let the mentor be your buffer between you and the manager. That is, if you trust the mentor. You might also suggest like a team building or team training session with their participation and not their leadership of the session. You want someone else to facilitate that session of team building. And you want someone good to be in there who can ask the right questions, observe the behaviors. And I can almost guarantee you that a good team facilitator will be able to see things that the leader's doing and that typically everyone else on your team is seeing as well. And typically that can happen in a day or less. Or you could wait for the next reorganization, but this is a little risky because You don't know how long that will be, and there's no real assurance that the next manager is going to be any different, because the same people that picked your manager today will be probably the same people that'll pick your manager for the reorganization. Unless it's you, then you win, okay? It's all great then. Now, you may be in the situation where you feel that testers aren't valued. And the thing that I always try to remember about this is that value is seen differently by different people. And in some organizations, testers are highly valued team members, but not in all organizations, certainly. You feel like you're kind of left out. You know, you don't get invited to important meetings. You don't have any opportunity to give any of your feedback as a tester. Because no one thinks you have good feedback, for one thing. And you may sometimes hear things like, we have testers, but I have no idea what they do. Or that might be said about you. You may not actually hear that. Well, some ideas to boost your value. First of all, and this is really more of from the team perspective, but you have to know who your stakeholders are. You have to know who has the vested interest in the projects that you're working on. And then you need to find out what they need and what they value. And then you can find out what you can be working on. It's a good idea to get some of these key stakeholders on your side. And by the way, you want influential ones. You want people in your corner, on your side, who can kind of be your champion when it comes to testing. Because the reality is, you're doing them a huge service, because you're the filter, in many ways, between their job and failure with bad software. Another thing that I always tell testers is one of the best ways I think we as testers can change our image is from going from being known as a problem finder to being an information provider. You see, when you are known as a problem finder, you get associated with the problems. So when they see you coming down the hall, when other people, the developers, let's say, see you coming and walking down the hall, they think you're coming down the hall with bad news or a problem. And you may just be coming down the hall, but you get associated with the defects. But when you become an information provider, now we're talking about more than just defects. You're talking about the progress levels, you're talking about risk levels, you're talking about acceptance criteria levels, all kinds of things. And one of the best ways to actually visualize this and to show this is to build a great testing dashboard so that everyone can see the progress and value of testing. And it's also helpful to measure your defects and the impact value, then report it to the stakeholders. You don't want to miss out the reporting at stuff. And one of the things about test reporting, I know, it's one of the most boring things you can possibly talk about in testing, but that's where everything winds up. And that's where your value is shown. For example, what's the cost or the estimated cost of the defects that you found should they have appeared in production? That can have some significant impact to that message. And also, this is also kind of a challenge to a lot of people, but to be able to tell people what you do and how it adds value to your organization. Explain it like you would to your mother or your father or people at your family reunion or your friends. I know so many people tell me, I don't know how to describe what it is we do in software testing. And I said, well, you know, you have to break it down into things they can understand, like I find bugs in software before you do, or before the customers do, or something like that, or I make sure that you get the opportunity to have the best software possible. However you want to word that, that's what you need to be able to do so that people know exactly what it is you do for the organization. Now, lack of resources can be a tough one. This is where you just don't get the things you need to be successful in testing. You don't get the training you need, you don't get the tools, the other people, or the time that you need. And at the same time, management and user expectations are very high, that you're going to find all the problems. Okay, so part of this has to go back to a basic understanding of what testing can and cannot do. It can find problems, but it can't find all the problems because we can't test everything. We don't have time to test everything. But management sometimes doesn't see that. And it seems like sometimes we're always being asked to do more work with fewer resources, doing more with less. How many times have we heard that? Well, in dealing with this scarcity, my observation is that many times this is an expectation issue. And I don't know, it seems that management seems to not understand that there's this effect. Jerry Weinberg calls it the law of strawberry jam. The wider you spread it, the thinner it gets. And so management needs to know that the wider you spread resources, the thinner and less effective the total output becomes. In fact, like with the strawberry jelly example, you can spread it so thin on toast that you can't even taste it. And sometimes that's what we get in testing. We get spread so thin that it's even hard to know that any testing has occurred. One thing you might do is just try to change the context and ask your management, would you deny developers the resources they need and still expect them to do their job well? Well, of course not. You know, we could never not invest in the tools and the talent and all that it takes because they're building the software. Well, testing is an integral part of that, of course, and if you flip the context just a little bit, you can see the logic. You can also try to do more with less by making your testing as efficient as possible, by designing your tests smartly, not having a lot of redundancy, perhaps getting real creative with how you use your tools. I think it's funny though, sometimes, you know, some companies won't allow you to have the money to buy a tool, and then the security team, they won't let you use free tools either. Or if they do, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to do that. So it's kind of like a no-win situation. You know, what are we going to do? Rub two sticks together to make testing happen? So bottom line is you're going to have resources. Now, as a tester and a test consultant, one of my key stakeholders in projects are the project managers. And they especially need to know when resources are constrained, because eventually this is going to come back on them. Now, if they can't or won't correct the situation, then basically you're left with what you have. You document it in your test plan or in a test status report, what the impact of it is, and go on from there. But basically, you need to try to make the case in hard dollars and cents why you need the resources. Now, once again, some companies get this in a big way, and they've invested heavily in testing. Others think it should happen automatically overnight by elves. So I don't know what to tell you, but sometimes when you just cannot get management's attention, you just have to do with what you have. Now, I will say this. Sometimes a good disaster will help you get the resources you need. It'll get people's attention about the risks that are being taken or maybe perhaps even ignored. Speaking of ignored, there's the issue of having your findings ignored. Now, you may do a lot of good testing, find some critical defects, yet management decides to release the software anyway. And you start looking like my buddy here, very unhappy, and probably asking, well, what am I doing here anyway, if all they're going to do is just release the software? So I always counsel testers on this one to ask yourself, number one, did I do the best testing with the resources I had? If I can answer that one yes, great. Did I perform as many tests as possible and report the outcomes accurately? If I did that, that's awesome. Did I do my best to make my case to management about the impact these defects would have on users? Hopefully I did. And did I document what was found in testing for future brainstorming? So if you can answer those questions in the positive, then accept the situation as it is, go home, get a good night's sleep, and then collect your paycheck. And then you may have to do it all over again the next project, but you're doing your job, and it's not your fault that people are ignoring the indicators. It's almost like driving your car and your dashboard shows, your gas gauge shows that you're at a quarter of a tank of gas. And you keep driving, and eventually the gas gauge shows empty. But you keep driving. And that's the mentality some people have, is that they can go a little further with a little less, a little less. These are the people you see at the side of the road walking from their car looking for a gas can. So eventually this is not going to be sustainable. Eventually people are going to need to know the findings from testing, and they're going to start paying attention to them. Now, the bad news about ignoring the findings, though, is that they may cost a lot to fix in production. We know that. You may be blamed for them, which can be a very uncomfortable feeling. But this is only, like I say, a pattern of dysfunction that can last only for so long until a major problem causes a crisis. I want to tell you a quick story. I was doing an assessment at a major credit card clearinghouse company. This was a few years back. And the situation there was just terrible. All the original developers had left because they got tired of night calls every night. The testers' morale was low. The developers' morale was low. They were actually having problems on top of problems. Fixes would cause new problems in unexpected places. And the testing was just grossly inefficient. Not only ineffective, but inefficient. And the interesting thing about this situation was that the merchants out there running the credit cards, they really didn't see any of the problems. And the company was very good in their marketing, and their salespeople were very good about smoothing things over with customers. So really, as far as the customer base was concerned, everything was fine. So I go to my meeting with the executive management team, and I said, what you have here is a really bad situation. I said, there's a lot of waste going on just in terms of defects, money going down the drain. And I said, there's a huge amount of risk in terms of the amount of money flowing through this company every day. It was literally to the tune of billions of dollars. And the marketing director, there at the table, I'll never forget it, hands folded over each other, or arms folded over each other, leaned back in his chair. He says, the only metric I care about is lost customers. And we haven't lost any customers, so I don't think we need to make any changes. And I came back with an analogy. I said, okay, fair enough. That is one metric. But I said, let's say that you're running a restaurant. And in the restaurant, everyone is getting their food. It's the right food. It tastes great. It's not cold or anything. Has no hairs in it or anything. The waiters are friendly. Everything's good out in the dining room. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, your kitchen staff is dropping 2 out of every 3 plates of food that's being made. And I said, but the people in the dining room, they can't hear it. They don't know about it. I said, now, is that the way that you'd want to run your business? And I said, one of these days, going the rate you're going, the restaurant doors, the kitchen doors are going to be flung open, and everyone's going to see what's going on. Well, about 3 or 4 months later, I got a phone call from the CIO that had brought me in to do the assessment. And she said, well, you were right. I said, what? And she said, well, here a few weeks ago, we had a really bad problem. It impacted a lot of merchants, and quite a few of them left. And it was all because of the same old practices that we've done over and over again. Now, one other thing with just continually ignoring findings is you run up this thing called technical debt. I've heard it called bug debt before. I actually had one client that had a bug debt of over 25,000 defects that they knew about on their website, but they hadn't fixed. Testers had found them, customers had found them, but management didn't want to own up to it. Now, you may be in the situation where you're blamed for problems. I believe this is really a cultural issue, where you may be working in a company that has a culture of blame. And the thing about it is, blaming cultures don't really care who they blame, so long as they can find someone to blame. And it's really easy to blame testers, because they can always ask, well, what are we paying you for anyway? Aren't we paying you to find these defects? And here's one you missed. And once again, this is that expectation that testers and testing can find everything. Well, a couple of things not to do. One, it doesn't really look good, and it doesn't really help to shift the blame to somebody else, especially if it really was your fault. If it was your fault, just take responsibility for it and learn your lesson. But also don't accept the blame if it wasn't your fault. Personally, when I'm in the role of a tester, I keep good records of what I test, and I'm not afraid to show the facts. I'll show the screen video, I'll show the screenshots, I'll show when I reported it, I'll show who I reported it to, and then let it go from there. I think the facts speak for themselves. Now, what I've seen work on this is that when you have a good test manager or leader, they'll buffer the team from blame and stand up for the team and fight the battles for the team. They're not going to hang one of their team members out to dry. Now, the test manager, they can also work hard to implement some retrospectives and lessons learned. Now, one of the things that you'll hear about before you can do lessons learned, you have to be able to accept some hard truth. If you're in a culture of blame, you may not be able to handle the hard truth. You may not be able to handle retrospectives well. People may get mad at each other. People may just simply say, we don't have time for it, let's go on and create the same mistakes all over again. But from the personal perspective, any of us can learn from our own mistakes. But we don't have to take the fall for somebody else. Now, I kind of want to take a transition here of your career. And a few things that I would say to you after my experiences that I mentioned early on. And now I'm going on probably about over 35 years in software development and testing. You want to take care of yourself. As they say on the airline, put on your own oxygen mask first, because the people around you are going to need your help perhaps. And you can't help them if you're oxygen deprived. So even though it may sound selfish, you got to put on your own oxygen mask first. Now, some companies, I don't know how things go in Europe, but I know that in the US especially, some companies demand way too much from people in terms of workload. I know the vacation policies in Europe are a lot more lenient and enviable, and in my opinion, than they are in the U.S. In the U.S., we're the average worker is lucky if they get 2 weeks of vacation a year. Some get 3, a few get 4. But it's really kind of unusual. When I had the chance to have 4 weeks of vacation, I could never take it because I was always on a project and I couldn't roll it over. But personally, I've learned to set boundaries for myself. Like, I'm going to shut down at a certain time unless there's a real crisis going on. And I don't work weekends. I unplug on weekends because that's time I want to spend with my family. I try to take a break every hour or so, get up, walk around, go outside, do something a little different, even if it's only a 5-minute break. And I don't sacrifice my personal needs, such as having lunch and getting rest for work. I've done just the opposite of these things for way too long, and believe me, the end is burnout and workaholism, and you don't want to go there. And it's important also that you recharge your personal batteries. Do what you enjoy. If you have a hobby, or if you like to travel or read or go to concerts or whatever it is that re-energizes you, you want to be able to do that. It might be a spiritual thing, it might be just some hobby, but make sure that you keep your batteries energized and also stay encouraged. That's probably the number one thing you can do, because once you start going down the road of discouragement and all of this, then things really do start to seem hopeless. You also need to be proactive in your career. Now, I was very intentional in how I worded this bullet point, that you want to keep an open mind and learn new things, even things that you don't think you'll enjoy, in terms of testing, in terms of technology, and I would say even just life, things that you might pick up and read a magazine about a topic that you've never thought of before. But unfortunately, I think in our testing community, we're not a testing community. We're kind of a divided testing community. And we think we have our way to test and that's it. And I would suggest to keep an open mind, because you never know what kind of project you're going to be on. You never know what kind of technology you're going to be testing. You never know what kind of customer you're going to have. So, for example, what would you do if you were in the context-driven school of testing and you got a customer that demanded that you followed a certain standard? Or vice versa. What if you were a very structured type of tester and you went to work for a place that did nothing but exploratory testing, and you think it's like a heresy not to have a test plan? So I just invite you to think about, other ways of doing things and keep your options open. Be a person known for doing excellent work. Those are the people that tend to get the breaks. Now, I don't want to get into the whole thing about work ethic here. It's not so much how hard you work or how long you work, but it's the quality of your work that you want to be known for. And I think it's good to practice on new tools. There's a lot of free ones out there. I've got them on my website. I love to use them. You may only be able to use them at home because of work restrictions, but I believe every tester should have their own personal set of tools. One of my sons used to be an auto technician, and I found it very interesting. In that line of work, you have to bring your own tools. They don't. The shop doesn't provide them for you unless it's like a big piece of equipment, and the tools aren't cheap either. And I think as testers, we kind of need to have that same mentality. Have your own personal set of tools for doing things. And it's really important that you stay current on testing and technology trends, because they're just moving so quickly, and they turn so quickly, and they change so quickly. And I think it's also great to develop a specialty. Like, you might want to get into security testing or performance testing or something like that. And I've already addressed the question about would you be willing to work for a company that believes a little differently about testing, or even greatly differently about testing than you do. But one of the important things also you really need to do, just as habit, even if you have to force yourself to do it, is to network constantly with other testers and other companies. You can do this at testing conferences, you can do it on LinkedIn, any of the social media sites, but LinkedIn is probably one of the best ones to do that at. And then know your strengths. You know, if you have a weak area and you want to develop it up, that's great. You may get better at it, and you may be an average whatever that you're trying to get better at. But if you have a true strength that you can sharpen and perfect, then you can really be exceptional at that item. And so the question is, what is it that you're brilliant at? Some people are really great idea people. Some people are great at innovating things, and others are great at just following through on things. So some people, people have these attributes, and many times you're born with them. Some of these are skills that you develop and you kind of fall into and you do pretty well at. But just know what your strong points are. Well, I've saved the last question until the end. Should I stay or should I go? Now, that's the age-old question, isn't it? And it's a hard one to answer because it depends on so many factors. Like I mentioned early on, your investment in the company, your future prospects at the company. Do you have any kind of hope of career progression there or anything like that? The only thing that I do know is that as long as you, as your team and your company operates in a dysfunctional state, you're going to be miserable. Or at least your work is going to be less than it could be, less than optimal, and you're not going to feel good about it. And therefore, you're going to be reduced to working at the same level as the rest of the team, which is not a good level, and you're not going to feel good about yourself. Now, if you do decide to leave your company, then leave. I know that sometimes you may get a counter offer. They don't want to lose you, and it may seem attractive, but the truth is the trust has been broken when you've given your notice. And the management from that point on is going to very likely see you as someone who may quit at any time. So that's why I say think through the decision very carefully. But sometimes it's really about the only thing you can do. Sometimes you have to do it for your own sanity. And as I said, there's many factors that weigh into it. You need to get some objective advice from people who know you, who know the situation. But certainly don't see it as a failure should you move on to another opportunity. Well, I would like to say thanks for attending this webinar session, and I hope that it's been of some help to you in surviving the day-to-day issues that we have in the trenches. I invite you to visit my website, riceconsulting.com. If you have any other follow-up questions, feel free to email me at rrice@riceconsulting.com. Thank you very much.